this lecture is being recorded. And today we're going to dive into Active Record, which I think is one of the more exciting portions. It's the first time when it feels like something exciting is going on. You get to use a useful tool. You don't get anything onto a web page yet. That's going to be the real exciting part. But this is the first time you really get to interact with a library that's going to help you out in a ton of ways. And that is really a lot of what being a developer is about, right? Eventually, like, you're going to end up in a situation where you get really comfortable using libraries and using other people's tools in order to build really cool apps yourself with very little work. So before we get into it, let's review for a second what an ORM is. Can anyone remind me of what an ORM is? Because that's what Active Record is going to be.
Object relational map.
Yeah, so that's the full definition.
I think it's a way. Oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Kind of a way for our database to interact with objects that we've created and vice versa.
Vice versa. That's how we spell vice versa.
VICE.
Vice versa?
Yeah, it's because it's, I think, Latin.
I thought
Yeah.
I
swear I studied
I could
Latin.
be wrong. I'm probably wrong.
Vice, I think, means something very different.
Yeah, vice is like a vice. I'm wrong.
Yeah. But no, that was thank you for chiming in. And we now have
I have on the dictionary VICE.
VIC. All right.
Yeah.
Nice. All right. Well, we all just learned something here. So if you don't take anything away about Active Record, at least you know that that's true. Cool. So really quickly, before I really dive in, I realized that I didn't really get into object inheritance last phase. I know there were some labs on it, right? But I want to give you like a quick view so that we know everything about Ruby, everything in Ruby, what's going on. So I'm going to do a test.rb, right? And I think at this point, hopefully a couple of things make sense. Basically, in Ruby, we can define a class, right? Class dog. And def woof and puts woof woof, or let's put bork. Cool. I'm just going to require pry here. I do pry dot start, right? And now I can run ruby test.rb and we can do dog.new.woof, right? Or we could go like d equals dog.new d.woof, right? Cool. And this is all familiar, right? Nothing scary happened here, right? This is a class. What we can also do though is we can go ahead and say, hey, dog can be like, is a type of pet. And I actually want multiple types of pets to all have a lot of similar behavior. So I'm going to actually just go ahead and say class pet. Every pet will have def initialize and at name equals name, attribute reader name, and a method that says def say name and puts hi, my name is. All pets in my universe can talk. Self.name. Cool. And now we can, before we do anything else, we can test that this works. Pet.new name equals spike. Right? Oh wait, that's not right. Pet.new spike. P equals pet.new spike. Cool. And we can try p.say name. And we get, hi, my name is Spike, right? Now let's say we wanted dog to have all the behaviors of pet, but the ability to woof as well. We can simply say, hey, dog inherits from this other class called pet. Give me all the stuff about pet and then this additional stuff too. I'm going to show you what that looks like. So currently P right here, before I do this, P cannot woof, right? There's no method for woof on pet. But if I restart this, right, I can go ahead and say dog.new. And then right here, let's take a look what's going to happen. Does anyone know what's going to happen when I call dog.new here? With no arguments?
It's gonna create an empty class
Maybe.
or give you back an error.
And it's actually that one. And the
Make-
reason it's getting it is because there's a wrong number of arguments. It was given 0 and expected 1. I don't have an initialize in my dog class. What happened?
Dog inherits its methods from the pet class.
Yeah. So dog inherited this initialize from the pet class, which is cool. Now there's a way to like do 2 different initializes. We won't really dive into it right now. I'm not trying to like give a full like explanation of inheritance. But if I go now and say d equals dog.new spike, now this works. And I can call the same name method from the parent. And I can like the parent class. And I can also say woof, which is from this child class. Cool. So I'm just saying is, hey, grab all the stuff from this parent method. And there's a lot of meta programming that you can do with this. But the important thing about inheritance is it allows us to send a lot of methods into our class that often we can get from somebody else's code. An active record is a clear example of someone else's code that we can inherit into model methods. So I just wanted to show what inheritance was briefly before we started to use it, because nothing here is going to be magic. There's nothing here that's not just someone else's Ruby code somewhere. Cool. So I'm going to now comment this out. We can just keep it in there. Why not? Exit. Command G. Oops. You can go ahead, just tack this on. Say test inheritance. Dunzos. Whoops. Explain ORM. Cool. So now we can get into the cool stuff. So I just wanted to take a step back, be like, hey, going back to phase 1 Ruby, wanted to show that, make sure everyone was aware of it before we started using it. Cool. So, done. We don't need to comment this out. So really quickly, last week, I built an ORM in study group where I built a bunch of methods really imperatively describing how a model should communicate with its table in the database. We had to like create tables. We had to do a bunch of stuff. And then we had to create a bunch of methods like find, create, save, like a bunch of things that it would be so awesome to not have to build for every single model we ever want to create. Eventually, we're used to building with 2-3 models. Eventually, you might be in a stack that might have like 100, 200 models. And if every single time you're working to build out your way of building out that table with SQL, that's a lot of wasted time. So Active Record exists to just give you all the tools that we spent all last week building, and a bunch more. It's a great tool that kills it, honestly. As we dive into Active Record, one thing that I want to talk about is this convention over configuration. We're going to talk about this a lot more when we introduce Rails, because Rails kind of invented this or popularized this idea of convention over configuration, which is a controversial one in development. I will talk about it a lot. But Active Record fully abides by convention over configuration. Can anyone take a guess as to what convention over configuration means?
Is it like recognizing certain patterns and kind of creating a standard that everybody sticks to?
Yeah, that's pretty much exactly it. The idea here is, hey, you follow our rules, you play by our stuff, we will make things easier for you. This goes like when we're writing our own code, you can be as YOLO as you want. You can name tables, whatever. You can like name your classes, whatever, and then you can like type out your SQL to relate however. In Active Record, there will be things that feel weird that are just rules that you have to do, otherwise everything will break. The most famous one is naming conventions. Really quickly, to just talk about this, when you're defining a class, you use capital singular, right? If it's got two words, you link them like this. When you're defining a table, lowercase joined by underscores. These sorts of rules are really weird. Note that there are times when it will try to pluralize for you. It's not going to say mouses, it's going to say mice. As we dive into this leads to a lot of linguistic ambiguity. Fortunately, Ruby has methods for that. We can go ahead and say, let's go ahead and say dog.pluralize. What? Is pluralize an active record method? I forgot that one. Ruby, pluralize. It's a, nope. You might have to wait till, there we go. So yes, this is an active record method. We haven't required it yet. Eventually I'm going to just try this out again when we have active record. I really thought I didn't need to test this out beforehand, but you can always use dog.pluralize is dogs, right? So I just used this thing that I just copied from Stack Overflow. Eventually, once you load up active record, I think it does this for you. So we'll test that in about 20 minutes. Octopus.pluralize. I will answer that in 1 second. Octopus is going to be pluralized to octopi. You might be like, hey, but it's got Greek roots. It should be octopode. This is not the case here. There's also some very silly ones, right? Human.pluralize. Anyone know what this is going to give me?
My
Worse. So there are goofy things that happen with active record. Be prepared to double check pluralizations and stuff. But when we get this done, right, the reason we have to do this is because eventually active record is going to make a lot of assumptions for you. It's going to be like, oh, so you've created this table called this. I'm going to assume that this is in this file and named this and doing this thing. You created a migration that did this. Boom, boom, boom. I'm going to do this all for you. And if it can't guess the exact name, it's going to be sad. Is using active record what Rails is? No, but Rails uses active record so aggressively that they're kind of active record is ordinarily a part of Rails. We are going to be using active record without Rails. Next phase, we will be using active record with Rails. Rails allows you to build out databases really quickly, but it also allows you to build out websites really quickly and build out APIs really quickly. What we're going to be using instead this phase is Sinatra, which is way more lightweight than Rails. I can talk a little bit more about why we're teaching Sinatra. The short story is that was a controversial thing. In actual later modules were actually revamped, or later classes were who joined after you. So students who are joining the Flatiron program as of like a month ago are actually not going to be learning Sinatra. I'm sorry in advance. They're going to be learning, they learned JavaScript first, then React, then Ruby, then Rails, I think. But what Sinatra will equip you with is two things. One, a really good understanding of how Rails works under the hood. You're going to be using a lot of tools that that's not that Rails just gives you, and that if it breaks, makes you look like you won't know what to do unless you've learned how to build it up from Sinatra. 2, you learn how to navigate in less rigorous frameworks than Rails. Rails relies entirely on like convention over configuration, where Sinatra allows you for a little bit of like playful building up. So if you ever want to go to like Python Django or to Node with Express.js, you're going to find that it's a little bit less rigorous than Rails. Having a little bit of Sinatra knowledge in advance is going to make you a little bit more comfortable with it. The other thing is we want to teach you how the internet works before we teach you a huge heavyweight framework. So breaking that up is probably a little bit like makes a little bit more sense. But Sinatra is going to, okay, to answer your original question, Active Record is the tool that both Sinatra often uses and Rails definitely uses, and a lot of just regular Ruby apps use to relate to the database. Sinatra and Rails, though, also do a second thing, which is they will spin up a server for you, which will allow people to make requests to you from the internet and serve data back. We have not gotten to that point yet. We will get there soon. Cool. So by the end of this phase, you'll be building web pages, and those web pages will interact with the database. Our cohort is definitely going to do Sinatra. Cool. So we're starting from scratch here. And we're going to basically spin up a very similar app to what we've been building out in phase 1, or at least a very similar structure, right? And then eventually, over the course of time, we're going to use this to probably pivot to the internet. But right now, I just want to pivot to hosting something on the internet. But for now, we're going to be creating a database. We're going to be using rake files, things like that. And you're going to see a very similar structure. I was torn on the domain that I was thinking for this app. But since we were just talking about Octopus, and because I played with it a little bit in advance because I saw Faker had this, I'm thinking a app that allows you to initialize Greek philosophers and have them battle each other. Sound good? Great. So we're going to start off with a lot of stuff that's going to look very similar to our previous structure. I'm going to make a config folder. I'm going to make a database folder. The one difference, we use lib, and now I'm going to use app. This is going to be much more like how Sinatra and Rails handles things. And I'm going to explain a little bit more about why in a couple of weeks. But this is going to think of this as our app folder. And from now on, we're using rake because our goal here isn't to like run a little executable to run in our console. Our eventual goal is to instead tell our computer to like do a couple of tasks, one of which is going to be spin up a server so that people can make requests over the internet to our code. That's going to be in a while. But rake tests make a little bit more sense when you're starting to build stuff out with a server than a bin file. So I've been showing you rake a little bit. I've been showing you bundler a little bit. They're going to be things that at this point I'm going to just start using, and I want you to just practice until you can use them yourself. Cool. I think there are labs on it that you should see on rake file. Like has anyone seen the rake labs yet? Should have double checked that. Cool.
Just one so far.
The important thing to know is that it just generates, like, it's a way of like turning Ruby code into tasks that you can run in the console. And I'll show you that in a second. But for now, we definitely need an environment file. And we've used environment files before, right? But I haven't really given a like kind of formal structure for them. Environment files, the goal there is to have one Ruby file that pulls in your entire app. And we can kind of break that down to 3 different things. Require the gems, require the files, set up the database, right? So if we're using bundler, right? First thing we can do to just give us access to bundler in our directory, we can run bundle init, which does a lot for us. It creates a gem file. I don't have to type this out. I've seen other instructors type this out every study group. Like source Ruby gems, you can ignore this a little bit if you want to. You could probably make this work without this line of code, but bundle init will just set up a bundle file for you. Cool. And here I can start adding some gems. In this case, I'm going to add SQLite 3. We know we're going to use that. I'm going to add Pry because that's my best friend. We're going to add active record. And here's one heads up. I'm just going to add this to the README. I'm trying to figure out if there's a different way that other instructors have been doing it. But I found that active record 6 is prone to a lot of errors and doesn't really, when it links with Sinatra. I don't think it works very well with Sinatra. It's an update. Most of the labs use an earlier version of active record. And I'm going to encourage you to do the same thing until I figure out what the heck everyone else is doing. But I think for the most part, everyone here is forcing Sinatra to 5.2.4, which is just a stable release that works well, or active record to 5.2.4, which when you write this in your gem file, what you're saying is, hey, use this particular version of this gem. Cool. And if you just use this, you shouldn't get any errors. I'm sorry about that. I think that like active record updated to like catch up with the new version of Rails. Rails produced a new one, and Sinatra is less maintained than Rails. So that's my theory for why things are breaking. If you just do this, it should work. Cool. Does anyone have questions on this? This says, hey, use this version. We good? Cool. And I just want to make sure that that's the one I want to use. And then also we're going to use gem Sinatra active record. Right now I mentioned that we're not really using Sinatra for all of its purposes, but there are a couple of tools that are awesome from this that I want to use right away. So I'm including this gem, and I'll show you what those tools are. And then, because it's fun, gem Faker. Also, big news. The Mambo number 5 name generator is officially on Faker. It's going to be incorporated in the next version. It happened. Thank you. So that's exciting. They decided they wanted to use it in the music module itself rather than making it a submodule on music. So you can get like keys, chords, instruments, genres, bands, and then Mambo number 5 names and nothing else in that module. I love it. But here we are. I think this is all we'll need. If I'm wrong, we can always add something, right? So by adding these gems, just as a reminder of what bundler does is it gives everyone else code that they can run so that if they have the gem bundler installed on their computer, they can just run bundle install and it will like look through and add to their computer any gem that they don't already have. And force it to your version that you've been using. And it'll also install any dependencies that those gems might have. So it's awesome. We can go ahead and run bundle install right now. And you'll see that it generates this gemfile.lock, which just tracks all the versions that I'm using. It says, hey, this is bundled with bundler 2. Here's some dependencies. Here's all of the gems that we're using. And here's the versions that we're using. This means that other people will be running your version, and it makes version control way easier. In order to make it work over here, we can do require bundler. This is the only gem that we have to require directly, and then bundler.require to go ahead and actually get those gems from bundler. Cool. At this point, I am going to set up a rake file real quick. Touch rake file. And if you have the gem, if you've gem installed rake, this should already work for you. It's worthwhile to add it to your gem file too. I think it'll do some things. I'll actually cross that when we get to it. But with what a rake file really does is it allows you to create. You create a rake file in your root directory, and all it does is it allows you to define tasks. Say hi to the class. Do and puts hi class. Yeah. So now I can go ahead and say hi to the class. And it's going to run that Ruby code. So basically this is a way of saying, hey, these are command line operations that you can run by saying rake, say hi to the class, that then runs whatever's inside of it. Cool. It also behaves like Ruby. So if I wanted to do this, I've shown you how to do this another way. I might want to continue that, but we'll see. We can go ahead and just require environment, right? And I can also do something like task. Once I've required the environment, it'll now open up a pry for me. If I didn't require the environment, this wouldn't work because it doesn't know what pry is, right? It's only after our gem file is loaded in that we can make this work. Rake also has a really useful command. Say, hey, show me all the rake tasks. You rake -t with a capital T. Cool. I thought you could do that. What did I do wrong? Rake -- tax. Cool. It's not printing these out. Maybe I have to like actually add a description, which is annoying. But I want to show you something cool. Which is that the moment I say this, go into Sinatra's gem, go into active record, and grab, I think, rake. I'm just double checking this. I do have a cheat sheet. Because this is not something you have to set up all the time. Yep. Once I've required this, we're going to see something very different. Okay, let me actually add. I think the issue is I don't have rake added here. Bundle, install. Rake -t. This is gonna drive me insane. I'm sure I tested this one out. Cool. Did I not save? Is that it? Yeah, there we go. Cool. Notice. Yeah, I think I need to add descriptions here. Which I will solve later when I remember how to do that. But notice, like, I'm gonna comment this out real quick. Nothing shows up. When I add this back in, you're noticing it just gives me a ton of different rake tasks. Cool. Sinatra's active record gives you a lot of rake tasks that we're about to dive right into. That will allow us to do a lot of really cool things. So I want to hop back for a second. We're almost there. I'm going to create philosopher.rb. Cool. Class. Oops. Shameful. In JavaScript world. So currently, we've got this class of philosopher. We can go ahead and we can require this. Require relative /app/philosopher. Darby. Oops. Now that we're actually in active record mode, I'm going to actually encourage you to make a secondary folder called models that you put your actual classes into, your classes that relate to things in the database. This is because eventually we will be teaching you this paradigm that Rails kind of perfected, or at least like really popularized, called the model view controller paradigm. For now, all you need to know, put inside of model, if it's going to relate to a database, put inside models inside app is like the general practice way to do it. Cool. So app/models/philosopher.rb. Cool. Or you could just say philosopher and it'll know. And then the last thing we're going to have to do, I'm absolutely going to get this wrong, is set up the database. Active record will give us a tool to do this. Base.establish connection. And here, I'm going to go ahead and create a little file right here, and I'm going to call this development.sqlite. And then here I'm going to say database, or first I'm going to say adapter. SQLite 3. I think this has to be a string. We'll double check. And then database db/development.sqlite. You might see a different version of this where you like first create an environmental variable, right? I might talk about that. I'll talk about that in a bit. Or at the end of lecture if someone asks a question about that. That's just a fancy way of preparing it to take in a YML file. Right now, the important thing, eventually you're probably going to, when you're building out, especially Rails apps, but especially if you're building Sinatra apps that you're actually planning on publishing on the open internet and not just hosting on your computer. Generally, there will be 3 databases that developers usually use. First, the development database. This is what I use when I'm coding on my local machine, just to like practice, make sure everything works. Then there's a test database, which runs our tests against a predetermined database. And then there's the production database, which is going to be the one that the world sees and the world uses. Right now, I'm just showing you how to set up a development database on your own machine. We're going to get to the point where we're going to be like publishing it on the open internet later. But that's the reason why we're using this term development right here. So first off, at this point, I'm going to go ahead and just see if Wraith console breaks. Yes, because I didn't put a comma here, and this is a hash. Cool. So now ideally, this is all we really need to tell it where our database is going to be. Cool. The next thing. So now we have a database. We can actually double check. Let's reveal in Finder. Open with DB browser for SQLite. Another good example. So first off, it opens. Another good example of an adapter you're going to be using probably is PostgreSQL. That's a much more heavyweight framework for a database. And it's the one that if you're ever deploying to the internet through Amazon Web Services or Heroku or something like that, they're going to be expecting. So a very common pattern that I'm talking way in advance on is to build using SQLite for your local machine for your development database and use Postgres for your production level database. And when we get to that, it's going to be more simple than you expect, I promise. It's mostly just going to be changing this to say Postgres, which is cool. But yeah, for now, if you're just doing this, you're good for the next 8 weeks. Cool. So this is the Active Records tool to go ahead and say, hey, this is our database that we're going to be using when we're coding. This solves that problem for us. This is the same thing as like setting up that DB con, right? That we did last week. This goes ahead and tells Active Record what our database is. How are we feeling on this? This right now is just, I realized, copy pastable basically. We're going to get to some cool stuff very shortly. How are we feeling about all of this setup so far? This is really the only new thing. And the fact that this happened was very cool, and we'll get to that. We good? Thumbs up, thumbs sideways, thumbs down. Cool. So at this point, yeah, we can talk about that after. Or I'm also going to try to open up more office hours tomorrow too. So if you're nervous here, I'll pop those open. Cool. So here we now have this philosopher class. If we call rake console, it does load, right? Philosopher that new exists, right? But it's not currently using Active Record. I'm going to tell it to. I'm going to say, hey, inherit from Active Record base. Cool. And this is going to lead to some errors. In that, when I call philosopher new, it's going to say, hey, I couldn't find a table called philosophers. That's a cool error because it means it's trying to connect it to a SQL database. Right? So it's at this point that I want to talk a little bit about something called migrations. In our old world, when we wanted to go ahead and add a table to a database or add a column to a database, we'd go ahead and write some SQL method that just did that, right? We'd have like some create method that was like in our class that would manually insert SQL into our to like run into our database. What Active Record expects instead is it gives you a domain specific language to build out migrations that change your database. A migration is any set of instructions that defines changes to the database. And it has a very specific formula for how you do it. So I'm going to show you what that looks like now. If I go to rake-t again, you'll see that there's a lot of commands I can do. And one of the first ones is create migration. I'm going to go ahead and just type rake db create migration and see what it does right here. It says no name is specified. And then it says, here's an example usage. Go ahead and run this line of code. In this case, I'm not trying to create users as a table. I'm going to do create philosophers. Cool. Now it's going to do a bunch of things for me. First off, it created this migrate folder, which didn't exist before. Cool. And then it also generated this new file that said this right here, and then like set up this whole class for me. First off, does anyone know what this big set of numbers is?
It's the date and time it was created.
It is. So first things first. Don't mess with the names of what you created here. Cool. Do not change this number. Why do you think it's valuable? If we're going to have multiple migrations describing how we build a database, that we keep track of when it was created.
Because it migrates in order.
Yeah, exactly. We don't want to add a column to a table before we've created that table. So by creating this migration first, we can then, like if we create another migration, it's going to know to run this one first. Order is important when it comes to setting up a table. Cool. You still have to use the create table method in the migration file right here. Create philosophers. eventually when you get to Rails, it's going to be a little bit simpler. You can actually, if you like very specifically use like Rails DB create migration, you can also, if you like type it really precisely, it'll try to make a guess about what table you want to create. In this case, we just are going to use this def change to go ahead and use this create table method. So create table is going to look like, actually, I'm going to step back a little bit. I can build this out, but I want to show you the documentation here. Whoop. Maybe I just open it up here. Cool. I already have it. Really quickly. If you go to these documentations, you'll find that first off, all of this is on the Ruby on Rails guides. That's going to be the really good, that's going to be like the predominant source of truth for active record documentation. And I want you all to get a little bit familiar with it. The Ruby on Rails documentation is the reason why Ruby on Rails got popular. It is a brilliant piece of writing. It describes a lot of how a lot of things work. Some of this might be a little obscure right now, but it has this whole thing on migrations right here. It's going to like describe everything you could possibly need to do. So for one, if I want to learn how to create a table, I can just click here and it'll say, hey, use this. There are a couple of things that when you're using the Ruby on Rails guides, you have to look out for. Like model and scaffold generator, this is not going to be relevant. Eventually, if you're going to be building stuff in Sinatra, like building views in Sinatra, like putting HTML onto a page, there's going to be a lot of helper methods that Rails would give you that Sinatra will not give you. So if you ever find yourself copying Rails code over to your like views, you're probably doing something a little bit wrong. We're only inheriting the active record portion of Rails into our Sinatra app. And yeah, Raquel, that's exactly right. When I wrote rake db create migration, name create philosophers, it went ahead and first made this big string, this big like date time underscore create philosophers that said, hey, this is the moment you created it and this is the name you gave me. Cool.
Was there already a rake file written for that? I'm sorry if you did, I missed it.
There, as in like a migration file?
No, in your rake file, did you write a method to, oh no, so it's just attached to active record.
Yeah, it's inherited from Sinatra's active record.
Gotcha.
Cool.
Thank you.
So here we can go ahead and whoops, let's dive back into this. I'm just going to copy this. And you'll see if you want to like dive into this, you'll see there's a lot of like cool things that you can like write into it right away. You can be like, hey, first off, it's going to fail if it doesn't get a value. You can go ahead and take a look at the types of columns you can add. There's a lot of really cool stuff in this documentation. I really urge you to, especially as we get towards Rails, get used to these documentation. But for now, and also right now, if you are going to be going into a review and you know what the active record documentation looks like and where your code is, you have a cheat sheet right available. You don't need to go back to your previous code. You don't need to do anything else. If you get really used to using the active record documentation right now, then when it comes time for your next code review, they will allow you to use the active record documentation and will be happy to see you pulling information from it. So if you're going to cheat off something when you're like building out new code, don't go back to your old code. Don't go back to learn. Get into the habit of going into this guide, because once you know where it is in this guide, you'll never forget that. And then you can go ahead and cheat all you want on the code review. Cool. So in this case, I'm going to create a table called philosophers. So notice that it's plural right here per the naming conventions. First, can I really quickly? First off, I want to check this out. Can I now call pluralize? Nice. Okay. So once you've loaded up active record as a gem, you can go ahead and call these pluralize methods. You can also do the reverse, that singularize. So if you do human dot singularize, it'll go back to human. Cool. Always good to check these if you don't know what it is, what the pluralization is going to be. Cool. I'm going to initialize with them with a name. This might be a little unfamiliar to you, like this do t. In this case, it's passing you an object called, this is like, I think a task builder is what T is short for here. That's just going to have a bunch of different methods that it comes with. The important thing to really know that it's just like a big fancy Ruby way of writing a method that allows us to do things like T, Boolean, evil, right? We should know if the philosopher is evil. T dot power level. It's probably going to be an integer. Oh, wait. Other way around. T dot Boolean evil T dot integer power level. And this right here is going to relate to what? Each of these lines.
A column?
That's exactly right. A column. I'm going to also give them an HP, right? Because we're going to have them fight. We should give them a mantra. Cool. And there's going to be a few different things that are going to be really helpful when we're describing our battle philosophers. Cool. So here I now have this, using this new language that Active Record provides for me, this domain specific language. I can describe how I would like a table to be created without writing any SQL. It's going to do that for me. Cool. And the way I know how to do this is because this is all available at various points in this documentation. Cool. Cool. And now at this point, once I'm done setting up a migration, just by coding this migration, it does not change our table on its own. It describes a set of processes for changing a table. To actually incorporate this into our database, I have to run rake db migrate. And it's going to go ahead and it's going to then incorporate this into our database. So first off, if we go over here now, we browse our data, but first let's open this again. Can I do this? Nope. If I go reveal in Finder, open with DB browser, you'll now see that there is a table called philosophers in our database. Cool. Has an ID, name, evil, power, HP, mantra. Cool. And it's going to do a lot of this for us. Cool. So we now have this in our table. It's also going to spit out the schema right here. And the schema basically is something that you should never code into or touch directly that describes how our database works. Cool. Please, if there's one thing, don't type something in here. Don't touch it. It's like coding into your database. Sometimes you will be able to change things. It'll be bad though. Cool. Only interact with your schema through migrations.
What does that force cascade mean?
I am unsure. We can Google it. It's probably some weird thing that has to do with okay. So this is going to have to do with when we get to relationships. When we get to relationships, there's like ways to set rules about how, like, when you delete something, whether it deletes an associate object on a different table, things like that. This is by default. I've never had a reason to change this ever in my life. So I think you're good if you just keep it there. Cool. And the second thing that I will warn you about, once you have migrated, if your migration is incorporated into your actual app, do not change the migration, because def change is actually an interesting little method here. There's another way to write this that where you do def up and def down, which will go ahead and tell you exactly how, when you incorporate this migration, what it does, and if you revert it, what it does. Change incorporates both these things. So when you write def change, you're also giving Rails instructions for how to remove it when it's done, when like you don't want it anymore. So in order to revert a migration, you can run rake db rollback. And you can see now our schema has nothing inside of it anymore. And then you're safe to mess with this migration. If there's multiple migrations, rollback will roll back the most recent one. You can tell it to roll back multiple things by using like a step equals 2 or something like that. But when a migration is up and you change it, you risk a chance of it not knowing how to revert that migration. In general, if I can urge you to take some time to learn how to modify your table with additional migrations rather than just continue to update your create table method, which is something that a lot of beginner developers do. It's a way better practice for learning how to develop migrations and how to use them. Because when you get to production level code with an actual like boss, they will be very upset if you decide to roll back a production level database and delete an entire column worth of user data. So generally speaking, the best practice is to, instead of ever modifying your old migration, use new migrations to change your table. So you will find in this documentation ways of changing a column. Say, hey, let's rename products to something else. Or let's rename part number to be a text field. And you'll be able to find like anything here that you want to like actually change your columns. And you'll remember, I briefly mentioned that we're using SQLite. SQLite makes it almost impossible to change a column name. You have to do like 20 steps, and Active Record will just do it for you, which is awesome. Like basically what SQLite tells you to do is like recreate the entire table, adjust this column, do a whole nother set of migrations. Active Record just handles it for you. So 2 rules that I do want to get in the habit of. Don't ever change your schema directly. Cool. Don't modify your migration while it is after it has been migrated. Best practice, create a new migration to change your table. Okay, practice for beginners. Roll back first, then do a new migration. This is very abstract right now, I realize. How are we feeling on this? Did any of this make sense? Cool. Yeah. No, Active Record's earnestly the best. And we're about to show you why it's the best. So now we've migrated here, right? And our philosopher table, in like this is our entire class for philosopher. Just inherit from Active Record base. Cool. Go run rake console. Philosopher, that new. Take a look at this. What happened?
created a new philosopher object without any information.
Yeah. And it also knows all about our entire table, right? It says, hey, there's no, like, we're expecting a name, we're expecting evil, we're expecting power level, we're expecting HP, and we're expecting mantra. That's crazy that it knows how to do that. We can call philosopher.all now, and we get nothing, but that's great. Cool. So it went ahead and, like, without us having some initialized method, right? We haven't defined an initialized method. We haven't created these instance variables, but already setting them equal to nil based on the structure of our database. This is very cool. It's about to get cooler. So now, really quickly, we're going to take a second to actually stock up our actually like populate our database. I'm going to be building your first seed file. This is going to take me about 3 minutes. If you don't really care to see how a database is like just seeded by being running a bunch of create actions, feel free to grab a coffee during the next like 3 minutes and come back at 7:05. I'm sorry, or a water or something that normal people drink at 7:05 p.m. But thanks for the solidarity, Alex. If that was coffee you were drinking.
It's
So-
caffeinated tea. It's close enough.
Nice. So one thing that is very valuable that Rake knows how to do. Oops, seed.rb. Is Rake has a task. Oops, I'm in Pry. And you can stop this. Rake-t. It's seeds.rb, sorry. I knew I was getting that confused. Rake comes with a rake task that says, hey, when you run this, just do whatever Ruby codes in db/seeds.rb. That's something that Active Record just comes, like, it expects that you're probably going to have to put something into your database once, right? So here's where I can seed my database with a bunch of different philosophers. So first off, I actually want to do one more thing before I do that. Oh no, we can do that after. No, let's do this before. Let's say I also want to give them all a superpower. Cool. If I want to do that, you can go ahead and say rake db create migration. Add superpower to philosophers. Cool. And now we get another migration that we can use here. And then we can just do add column, which I'm going to steal from this documentation. Here is the table. Philosophers. Superpower. Strength. Cool. Rake. DB. Migrate will then run it for me. Cool. Now if I run rake console, superhero .new. Oops, philosopher.new. We'll now have a column called superhero. Cool. Or superpower. So this is kind of how you're supposed to create migrations. These two different things. Don't just roll back and add this when you know how to add a column. Get into the habit of doing that now. It'll make you a stronger developer and it'll make you a more playable developer. And your migrates are going to be pushed up to GitHub. So if you see a bunch of migrations where people are like adding and removing columns, you know, oh, this is a developer who understands a little bit about how databases work. So the more you can get into the habit of just adding additional migrations rather than rolling back and changing, the more you can signal to other developers that you're going that you understand this and you're not going to frag their database. That's a really good question. Generally speaking, seeds is just like like RakeDB Seeds is just going to run a vanilla Ruby file for you after loading everything in from your environment. You can make whatever conditionals you want in here, right? You can be like philosopher dot count equals 0 and seed philosophers, or like philosopher, like do whatever. And that's one way to do it. The other thing is your development database is something that you're probably going to be like rewriting all the time. So it's totally fine to just, generally speaking, this is actually important. If you are going to be doing a lot of testing of code and you're typing like, and you're in console and you're creating a bunch of philosophers, instead consider creating, or whatever you're building. You don't have to be building a Greek philosopher related app. Instead consider adding it to your seed file so that your seed file is always up to date with what you want your test database to look like. Cool. So here, I'm going to begin doing this. I've installed Faker, right? Cool. Let's go over to the Faker documentation where we can go ahead and nope. Cool. We can go ahead, get some Greek philosophers. Cool. And now one thing that I almost always do when I'm building out a seed file is just in my console, I call like philosopher.new so I can take a look at what all the columns are, because I find that easier than pulling up a schema. Like, and I can go ahead and say 30 times do, 30.times do, and go ahead, name equals fake, evil equals, that's going to be a Boolean, right? So true, false, dot sample. This is a weird one. Dot sample gives you a random number from, or a random item in an array. So if I do this like this, there we go. Wow, that's unusual. We had a lot in a row, but it's random. It's randomly grabbing something from an array. Let's go back to philosopher.new. Power level. We'll do something between rand 1 and 100. There's, I think 9,000 is too much for what we're trying to do. HP equals rand. Actually, let's make this more normal. 1, 1,000. Sure. Let's give this 500. Cool. This is dumb. I'm programming a game in my head that I'm probably not even going to like. I'm probably not going to finish today. But we've got a mantra, which we can go ahead and say equals. What would be fun here? We could do a philosopher's quote, or nope, this is not related to the hit song Driver's License, so I'm not going to pay attention to it. Let's go ahead. Where do we get some quotes from? Boom. Let's just be chill. You all probably want to see something better. Faker, Greek philosophers, quote. And then, so we got name, evil, power level, HP, mantra, superpower. This one, I will have to go to a different Faker gem. Marvel. What? Comics. Nope. I know there's a Marvel Comics here thing. There we go. Superhero. Cool. Nice. Faker superhero.power. Cool. This is going to be appropriate for these. Cool. And now I can just go ahead and say superhero.create name, name, evil, evil, power, level, power, level, mantra. Yes. Philosopher. In a way, isn't knowledge the real superpower? Superpower, superpower. And then I think I missed HP. Cool. So now let's try this out. So now I can do rake db seed, which is the thing that I showed you existed. And it's going to run this Ruby code. It's just running a file, right? This is just a nice place to store your data, to like store something to like build out your database. So now if I do rake console, or I think I can just do rake C. Nope. Fine. We'll have to wait for Rails for that. Now I can go superhero.all or philosopher.all. Cool. You can see that we've got Epicurus has heat vision. This is exactly the vibe I wanted. Cool. This seems super powery. The one thing I'll note is that there are multiple versions of Epicurus. We were using this create method. Where was this create method defined?
Active record.
Yeah, we didn't define it over here. We just said this, and it went ahead and made this create method for us. It actually does a bunch of other cool things too. If I wanted to go ahead and say, we don't have to do this now, but you can actually do like a find or create name, do, p. You could do something like, if I remember correctly, p dot equals. So hey, go ahead, see if that exists by its name. Otherwise, go ahead and create it. This is like some weird magic that I should probably be showing you like 4 classes later. But I can now call philosopher dot destroy all, another active record method. It's going to go ahead and get rid of all the philosophers for me. Rake db seed. This should work. Nope. Right, this needs an end statement. Cool. Find or create by, there we go. Cool. Now we can rake console. And now we actually have only 15 philosophers, which probably means that it tried to create a bunch of different philosophers, but already had one by that name. Cool. So there's just some like, they have insanely like useful macros that you can just go ahead and use out of the box. In this case, I'm saying, hey, find it by its name. If you can't find it by its name, build one out. So I can go ahead and say philosopher.all. You'll see that we now have a bunch of different philosophers. I urge you to just like dig into the active record methods. There will usually be a solution to whichever problem you're trying to accomplish. I can now call philosopher.find by name, so on, and it'll do that for me. Active record will also give me the ability to find any table that exists in your database. It's also going to create a method called find by that. find by name, Solon, find by power level. 91. There's an absurd amount of methods that you can go ahead and use. Cool. Yeah. So this is like grabbing these names from Faker. It's grabbing these quotes from Faker. It's grabbing the superpowers from Faker. And then it's randomly generating these, right? And it's just doing this 30 times, right? And then it's if it already finds it, it's not going to do it again. Cool. So these are the sorts of tools that Active Record gives you right off the bat, like a ton of them. We can call, there's a bunch of other methods that we can call. We can go say, hey, evil, true, right? Give me only the evil philosophers. And it'll do that using this where method, right? So where is going to be like, seems familiar, right? It sounds like SQL, right? We can do like philosopher.last. Remember how I always was typing philosopher.last and then getting an error and then typing philosopher.all.last, right? This is why, because Active Record allows you to just do this. Cool. Now at this point, what questions do we have about this? Because I just showed you a bunch of different methods that I just was naming off the top of my head arbitrarily. The reason I want to do this is because I want you to encourage you. As we get through this program, eventually we're going to be like leaning more and more on the docs. Take a look at the docs to figure out what methods you have access to. They're going to be super helpful. The labs are going to show you a bunch of them, but the more you can actually look at the documentation, the more of a really good developer you're going to be. And by phase 5, our goal here isn't to like teach you all you need to know to like walk out and do whatever. It's to teach you how to read the documentation so that you can do whatever yourself. Because it's way too hard to teach you Python, Ruby, like whatever. Active Record is the first time when you're really going to be given something with really, really good documentation. Cherish it, play around with it, take a look at what a before action is, things like that. There's going to be a lot of wild stuff in the documentation, and I will be exposing you a lot of it to you through the course of just using it, right? Like this find or create by method is a really advanced method that I just saw when someone else used it, or I think I saw it in the documentation, was like, that's cool, I'm going to remember it. And then I saw someone else use it, and then I was like, okay, this is perfect for everything I need to do. But do we have questions about like these aggregate methods that it just gave to us? All of this is just coming from this line of code, and including in the gem file and relating it to a table. So, okay, a few things. How are we feeling right now on these aggregate methods, the fact that they exist? Cool. The last thing I want to show you, and then we're going to end for the day because I showed you a lot. First I want to double check that that's true. README. Cool. We discussed rollbacks. The last thing I want to show you, we're going to dive into actually using these methods a lot next sesh. But for now, if I do philosopher.second, dot evil equals true, is this going to change my database at all? I'm actually going to go ahead and say p equals philosopher dot find by, or find 32. Cool. So I just gave that away, right? I just found that same one. Evil was still false in the database. If this is going to be very familiar from last session. If I then go say p.evil equals true, in order to actually make an update in the database, what do I have to do?
Save it.
Yeah, update.
P.save is one way. Yep, I heard save and then I heard update. So save, after you do like an equal sign, you can go ahead and save it by calling .save. And that's going to do it the old way, where we just go like, okay, cool, I'm going to mess with this object, change a couple of its values, and then I'm going to call save to change it in the database. Cool. The other way is that much like there's a philosopher.new, which doesn't save anything to the database, but a philosopher.create will. I'm going to destroy that real quick. You can call, let's grab P again. What's up, Hippocrates? We can go p.update power level 9001 because medicine is very powerful. And that'll save into the database. Cool. This is-
Telekinesis is also a perfect superpower right there.
Oh yeah. Oh man. Wow. They really leaned in. If there was a
Yeah.
way that I could give him like a cool staff, that would be awesome. And then we could probably like put the Hippocratic Oath right here, and then we would like be on our way to make a really cool game. But the way that you can update things in the database immediately is using an update. So what I don't want to see you all doing is getting really confused when you go like p.name equals Hippocrates, the really cool dude, right? Like this is not going to update your database. This will like, we'll update this object, right? But if I do philosopher.find 32, his name's still going to be Hippocrates. Cool. So you can set these equal to objects. Be like, hey, P is this cool object, right? In order to actually need to do a change, you have to either use save or update. Cool. The last thing I will tell you is I just threw a bunch of methods at you without describing what they individually do. Like I'm just like, hey, you can just type key value pairs. You don't need to pass in an object. You just type name equals name : Hippocrates. I wanted to update two things at once. I'd be like, Hippocrates, HP equals 1. Physician, heal thyself. And it'll just do that for you, right? You can go ahead and say, now he is the ultimate glass cannon, Hippocrates. Really want to make sure he has a good agility score and goes first. But like, so this is a lot of stuff, right? Like that I just called update. If we were in phase 1, I would have spent like a long time describing how we use update. Here, the best way that you can learn it, get practice. Do it yourself. I'm going to be doing a lot of this in class, right? To the point where you'll figure out, like, you'll be like, I know what update does because I've seen Nikki do it a bunch of times. You just throw a colon in there, done. The moment you start coding it, you're going to forget. I promise. The only way to solve these is get those reps in. Cool. So whenever you're doing the labs, find some additional challenges for yourself. Be like, hey, how do I seed this database myself? How do I test this out in my own head? Make this work. And when you do that, that's like the students who really survive and really thrive here are the students who get into that habit early of testing things out themselves, playing with the code, making sure that they understand how it works, and then moving on to the next lesson. It's not just about passing the tests anymore. The tests are about to get progressively worse. By the time we get to Rails, they're going to be the worst. They're going to be okay in Rails. In JavaScript, they're a mess. In React, we don't have tests. And there's a reason for that. Eventually, we want you to be thinking about how you're building stuff. And because it's way harder to develop tests once you start building things on the internet and making like really dynamic web stuff, and work with JavaScript, which has no rules whatsoever. So you have no idea what your student's going to type into the code. But just keep that in mind. Right now, 2 best habits to get into the habit of: look at the active record documentation when you need help with something. Try to find the answer in the active record documentation before diving into Stack Overflow. Or if you do find it on Stack Overflow, corroborate that on the active record documentation, and do a lot of testing your own code, building stuff out, trying to see how this works, opening up the console, seeing if it saves, things like that. Cool. All right. You've all been awesome. This has been a lot to dump on you. I just showed a whole library in one session. So tomorrow I will be opening up office hours, and that'll be a great time to ask questions. Say like, hey, I played around with this. This didn't operate as I expected. If you ever want to dive into a really specific topic, let me know in advance, and I'm totally down to like set up a pod. That hasn't gone away, that option. So I know that you're like all learning new stuff, but eventually we're going to get back to the habit of doing a bunch of weird things. Hit me up. Cool. Build association. Very good question. You are going ahead. That's something we're going to be covering up, I think, either Thursday or next week.